Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everybody. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. It is May 21st, 2014. I am your host, Andrew Fisher, and today we will actually have Lenon Honor on the show to expose the true and false nature of reality as it is, just like I do with my guests every week. We were supposed to have Catherine Albrecht on, but she chickened out. I'm sorry if you guys find that insulting, but I got a reply from the person who answers her emails saying that she didn't want to come on my show because of differences in spiritual beliefs. Well, that's a huge shame. I responded by saying that this show, one of the goals of this show is to try to combine the work of many different people from many different walks of life. So for her to say that she didn't want to come on my show because of spiritual differences is quite disturbing. I don't see why that should make any sort of a difference. Apparently she let her reputation get the best of her. How unfortunate. Well, I was able to get Lenon Honor on as a replacement guest. He is a filmmaker, a counselor, and saw him at the Free Your Mind conference in April 2013 in Philadelphia. Very knowledgeable in regards to, in that presentation he showed about fear and such, and how it affects us and how the media tries to brainwash us. He's also very spiritual in his talks and counseling and films, and I think he's also done a lot of music too. I haven't really got a good chance to look at his website, LenonHonorFilms.com. I'm going to be using that as a guide to help me get along with the show. But before I start covering the news like I always do, if any of you have been wondering where I've been on Facebook, I have gotten a message from Facebook saying that my account has been temporarily blocked because of security reasons, whatever that means. And how unfortunate that had to be the case. I don't know why they did that to me. Maybe they don't like what I'm doing on Facebook. Who knows? But I did have to send in a picture of my identification, send in one of my driver's license and my passport. And that happened on Friday. When I did that, they requested that I send in an ID to verify my identity, but they still haven't given my identity back. So I have been without Facebook since Friday and wasn't even able to upload this show on my Facebook group, Nature of Reality Radio Facebook group, and that may unfortunately cost me some potential listeners tonight. Got to get into the Matrix to beat the Matrix, but sometimes the Matrix will try to suspend you, like Facebook has apparently suspended me. They say it's only temporary, but one more that you need to know, I just sent in my ID. So you got what you need, just validate my identity. I think it's they just don't want me on Facebook for some reason. I'm not going to speculate on this any further. Hopefully I'll get Facebook back, and hopefully Catherine Albrecht will have a change of heart. Her work as a Big Brother expert is really important, something that we need on this show to expose the nature of reality because the Big Brother surveillance system is used as a consciousness suppressing tool for most of humanity, for all of humanity, They're spying on everybody. To a great extent, they suppress our consciousness because of the surveillance system. And would have been great to have her on to know how to beat the system, but that was not to be. Catherine Albrecht apparently let her fear of what other people think get to her, and that's why she decided not to be on my show. But right now we will do the news here until about 10 after the hour. I'll try to make this quick. Article courtesy of Alex Jones and the rest of his friends at InfoWars, we use as a news source every Wednesday for the first 5 to 10 minutes. First article here. Google wants to display targeted ads on your refrigerator and your car dashboard, thermostat, wristwatch, etc. Well, Google is a major part of the NSA. Google is a corporation that owns the government, well, a lot of governments to a great extent. Google search goes right into the NSA surveillance system. Would have loved to talk about this with Catherine Albrecht if I had her on my show today, because she is responsible for that website, search engine, startpage.com, which I use, and that site is not accessible to the NSA. It doesn't record your IP address when you search for things. Hopefully they'll create an email service for Startpage. Definitely want to make my own there, but Google wants to put targeted ads on your fridge, not just to, I'm sure spying has something to do with this, but don't have time to look into the article, but ads from Google. Don't trust any ads from Google. It's all brainwashing. Our next article, no end in sight for surveillance police state. Obama administration and Congress work to seriously weaken bill designed to rein in NSA. How funny is it that I'm reading this right now and Catherine Albrecht couldn't come on my show because of differences in our spiritual beliefs. Would have been great to talk about this. Well, it is what it is, and the government wants to make sure the NSA can keep snooping on everybody, because, as I just said, the NSA surveillance system plays a huge role in suppressing our consciousness and keeping us in fear. Definitely want to talk about that with Lenon on the show today. Next article, video. Cop causes man to lose testicles during traffic stop. Officer sees phone, deleted footage. Whoa. Talk about police state. Well, this is why I always say everybody should watch that video called Secrets Police Don't Want You to Know on the Alex Jones channel, where former Sheriff's Deputy and Rule of Law radio show host Eddie Craig talks about what you should do during a traffic stop. I'm sure Eddie would be hopping mad if he saw this. He probably already found out. And unfortunately, because I can't access Facebook at the moment, I don't really know what's going on Eddie's Facebook page in regards to this, but that guy should have used Eddie's script. Maybe if I find out who this guy is, I'll try to send him a link to Eddie's script. Too bad he'll be short one testicle. Ugh, my God, why would cops do this to people? Our next article, Huffington Post suggests talking about media ownership is anti-Semitic, asserting that the corporate press is owned by powerful people has anti-Jewish undertones. Talking about the media ownership is anti-Semitic, the Huffington Post says. Well, anti-Semitic does not mean what we think it does. It actually means anti-Arab, not anti-Jewish. And I actually like calling people Rothschild Zionists. Don't mind exposing that. I hope the B'nai B'rith and the ADL go after me and call me anti-Semitic for calling that. Rothschild Zionism is an elephant in the room. In his Lion Sleeps No More 9-hour talk that David gave, I believe David Icke gave back in 2010. He had like a 30-minute segment of that talk all about Rothschild Zionism being the elephant in the room, how so many people in our government are Rothschild Zionists and the rest of the government at large. And Lenon, I don't think, has called in yet, but I told him he has to call in. So before I continue with the news, let me just see if I can contact him here. I told him he's going to call the number. I guess maybe he'll wait till 10 after the hour, because that's what I told him when I get him on. But just let's try this again here. Next article. Oh, yeah, this anti-Semitic thing. Yeah, if you can, anybody wants to watch that, I strongly suggest you do. Just type David Icke, Rothschild Zionism into YouTube. You'll probably find that specific section on the. All right, he said he's calling in now. Hopefully he'll get on. I'm almost on the news here. That'll teach you all about Rothschild Zionism being the elephant in the room, about how so many people are not Jewish in this world, and only a small percentage of those Jews are Rothschild Zionists. One might make the argument Rothschild Zionists aren't even Jews. They're just masquerading as Jews, furthering a malevolent movement and a malevolent agenda under the guise of a religious movement, and talking about the corporate press being owned by powerful people that are Rothschild Zionists. It doesn't have anti-Jewish undertones. It's highly significant. It must be done. All right, next article. Cops steal flag, cite man for displaying it upside down. Soldiers have died, so Pennsylvania man is denied his constitutional and property rights. Cite a man for displaying a flag upside down. Well, it's funny how in David Icke's book, The Perception Deception, which I'm reading right now at this moment, he talks about a lot about how everything in this world is inverted to make this world a topsy-turvy Alice in Wonderland, up would be down and down would be up world that it is. And now, symbolic of that, the cops steal this guy's flag and cite him for displaying it upside down, displaying it inverted. When America is so inverted, it makes sense for him to do that. We're the Roman Empire, the modern era, because we invade other countries more than anyone else. And yet this man, he tries to symbolize that. I suppose that's what he was doing. And by saying America is not the land of the free, because among other things, we invade other people more than anyone else, and now this happens to him. All right, 2 more articles. Red Link, VA supervisor, older veterans should be shot in the head to save money. Exclusive. Whistleblower reveals new Veterans Affairs scandal. Yeah, the government really wants to go after returning veterans, demonize them, and say these returning veterans are a threat to our safety and security, so we must get rid of them. And those poor veterans don't know that they shouldn't be going to war, because wars are all an illusion, because the Illuminati controls all sides. All right, next article. Bill Press, VA scandal, just another Republican conspiracy theory. Lack of self-awareness abounds. No, this is not a conspiracy theory that the veterans are being attacked. This is the truth. They really are going after returning veterans. There's a red-linked article above this one that talks about that. All right, last article. Schindler's List producer, Obama wants to lock up foes. This administration doesn't see its opponents as dissenters, but as enemies. Yeah, it does see everybody as enemies, and this administration is the enemy of the American people. Worst president ever, Obama is, no question. Oh my God, Lenon is saying, every time I call it hangs up on me. Wonder why I'm not being hung up on. Let me see if you can try a landline phone. You try a landline phone. I'm actually going to try calling from my cell phone. Hope Blog Talk Radio isn't having a problem. I was able to call in, but all right, hang on a moment, folks. I'm going to put myself on mute, see if I can call in the show to find out what's going on here. Folks, I am back. I just tried calling with my cell phone. It did work. I don't know why he's having a problem with Skype, but let me let Lenon know that my cell works. Must just be a Skype glitch of some sort. So let me just pull up his website here so I can use this as a guide as I'm going on with the show. Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. This is quite unpleasant. It's been an unpleasant week. No Facebook, no Catherine Albrecht. She would have made a great guest. And let's see what Len is doing. He's getting his phone, he said. Sorry, we're behind schedule here. But we'll talk about some things like things that lie in plain sight, the workings of evil, and I'm actually reading off some of his works here. He has something here about Angels in the Outfield being a pedophile movie. Whoa, I liked that movie when I was growing up, and wonder what if I was brainwashed by it. Yeah, the early works of Walt Disney, the foundation of a pedophilic institution. Still don't see him. I guess he's still getting his phone here. The Borg Agenda is considered to be Lenin's masterwork, and it exposes symbolism, transhumanism, the occult, human consciousness, DNA, spirituality, and talks about another documentary here, media mind control and the BP oil spill. He did one on the death of Osama bin Laden. The creator, the gods, evil, and the manipulation of humanity. He does presidential elections are a fraud and increasing media mind control and all sorts of things here that Lenon talks about. He's a polymath, it seems like, in so many ways. A counselor, a musician, a producer. Boy, I hope it gets on soon here. I'm sorry, folks. Usually we get started at 10 after the hour in most cases, but right now there's a problem. You might as well hook up his cell phone to the computer. Don't want to keep it by his head unless he knows for sure that the cell phone will not emit dangerous microwaves and other things which could be harmful. So all I have to do is wait. What else is going on? Been sun gazing a lot. Feels really, really good to sun gaze. Really makes me feel spiritual and awake. Make great caffeine substitute. Feel like my pineal gland is more active. I did say that where the pineal gland is, there's a lot of light there. And whenever I go to Aikido practice, it seems to get more activated. The pineal gland does. It's been 5 minutes since he told me he's getting his cell phone. I hope he's not having a problem. Because every time he tries to call in, it hangs up on me. Is it maybe because he doesn't have a Skype system in which it costs money to call in? I mean, I make it clear in my messages. You got to call in the show number, and if you want to use Skype to call that number, because a couple of occasions I've said you can use Skype, and people seem to think that I have it set up where they can call Skype for free. No, there's a fee. If not, got to use a phone. I try to make that clear. But wow, what's going on here? Come on, Lenon. We're behind schedule here. Yes. Oh, this must be him. Area code 661. Is that you, Lenon Honor?
Yes, sir. How's it going?
Great. Hey, in regards to Skype, I don't have a premium account in which people can call in for Skype for free. There is a fee there. Did you, by any chance, see anything, a message like that when you tried calling in using Skype? Were you not aware of that?
Actually, no. I'm in Skype now at work this time.
Oh, okay. So you are in Skype. All right. Well, must have been a little glitch. Actually, Blog Talk Radio changed its layout, so it took me a little while to figure out that I had to click on a certain link to get in my studio. I thought about calling customer service because freaking out I wouldn't get my show started. But, hey, it's great to have you on. Got you on earlier than you wanted, and definitely would have loved to have Catherine Albrecht on, like I said in the earlier part of the show segment here, because of her knowledge about Big Brother. But apparently because of spiritual belief differences, she decided not to come on the show today, so now you get some glory going on here. But to express your views and beliefs and everything, lucky you. So anyway, you are a polymath of sorts, not just a film producer, a musician, a counselor, and other things. I think it's only fair that I give someone who does many things like you a chance to introduce yourself and why you do what you do, simply because you do so many things. So introduce yourself to us, please.
Yes, sir. Yeah, my name is Lenon Honor, and I'm a husband in the first place. Been married for 13 years. My wife and I, we have 5 beautiful children. Over the years, I've contributed a lot over the Internet in terms of media manipulation, analyzing media artifacts, mainstream news, alternative news, different techniques of psychological warfare. I've also looked at the entertainment industry and the use of symbolism and subliminal messages dealing with the subconscious mind, the conscious mind. I've also done analysis on music videos, the occultic aspects present in music videos. I've dealt with transhumanism. I have a long-standing documentary series, The Borgage and the Seven of Nines, and the sexualization of technology. And more recently, I've been getting into assisting people in developing positive relationships and also helping young males to understand the value of manhood and fathers to understand the value of fatherhood. And that pretty much in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more. I've written books on various topics: spirituality, metaphysics, manhood, masculinity, fatherhood. I'm writing another book right now titled Visions of Manhood, where I talk about my life journey into becoming who I am today and why it is important as men for us to be the front line of defense for our families. And part of the defense also deals with protecting our family's consciousness from various degrees of manipulation. And that's what a lot of my work delves into.
Yes, and I did see you at the Philadelphia Free Your Mind conference in April 2013. I was there. I believe we did speak. I did talk to you about how there were UFOs on 9/11. I don't know if you remember that, but I didn't actually see your presentation. I only saw a couple there, and it wasn't yours, but I did see the things that you were showing on the table there. And I guess we might as well start with the whole thing about 9/11, get this right off with a bang. You talked in your presentation in regards to 9/11 and fear, and also cycles of how whenever the thing comes around every year, they'll start talking about it again. And that was actually right after the Boston bombing happened, that conference. And you said chances are they'll be doing the same thing with the Boston bombing every single year, just like with and the thing with Osama bin Laden too. Even though it only happened like one time since that presentation, they were very, very clear about it when the 1-year anniversary happened about bin Laden. And at that time, we would have been talking about it.
Or more, I'm sure.
You were a little garbled there. I couldn't hear you clearly.
Oh, here she comes. She's
Lenon?
very late.
I hear singing in the background. Is that you?
She's a man.
Lenon, I hear singing in the background. Is that you? Something's going on here. I got to tell Lenon. Is this one of those things going on again that's with annoying music in the background? Let me ask if he can hear me. I think I may have to call Scott. Ask for some. Oh, shit, he got kicked off. Hang on a minute. I got to call Blog Talk Radio and ask for help. He's going to try calling again. I heard that annoying music in the background. May have to call Blog Talk Radio and ask them about this. Yeah, I heard that whole thing in live chat thing. Let me see if I can. Hey, Lenon, can you hear me? You're on the air again.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, we had that little problem where I could hear annoying music in the background. Someone was singing a song, and this actually happened once before with one of my other guests when they couldn't get the guest on him. I guess they heard annoying music in the background. Hopefully it won't happen again. If it does, I'll just have to call in with the live chat, Blog Talk Radio live chat, and see if they can fix the problem. But let's hope that doesn't happen again. But now that we're on, I was talking about how your presentation at the Philadelphia Free Your Mind conference was about 9/11 and also the Boston bombing and Osama bin Laden raids, how because of cycles throughout time, they're going to keep talking about that every anniversary. And that's all part of the brainwashing, all keeping people in a state of fear. So thinking back to that specific presentation you did, why don't you spend a little bit of time talking about the significance behind that presentation, and then after you do that, we'll move on to some of your other work.
Yes, sure. So you're referring to what I call the 911 fear-based mind control program, and this is an excellent example in terms of the need to protect one's mind. In other words, to keep your mind safe from different degrees of manipulation. And one of the greatest tools used to manipulate people, and in point of fact to mind control people, is to stimulate fear in people. And so I have realized that in terms of mass media, one of the things that mass media tends to do is and this includes mainstream and alternative, that mass media tends to take traumatizing stories and then will represent the story on the anniversary of that particular traumatizing event. And this is done over and over and over again. And the more traumatizing a story may be, the longer duration it is revisited. So in other words, it can be over a 5-year period, it can be a 10-year period. In the case of September 11th, the greatest traumatizing event of our lifetime, it has been going on for the last 12 years, 13 years now. And what I mean by this is that what happens is that, in particular, I call this the 911 fear-based mind control program. You'll find, and anyone, you can validate this simply by following the mainstream or the alternative media during the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th of every single year. Mass media begins to report on stories that have a subliminal resonance with September 11th, 2001. I have it inside my book, the 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Program, and I can just read this to you all real quickly here, that within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th of every single year, particular stories appear inside the news. These are trigger stories, and here's a list of those stories. Number 1, terror threats or cyber threats. Number 2, bomb threats. Number 3, Al-Qaeda. Number 4, stories about Osama bin Laden. Number 5, TSA or plane problems. Number 6, national security issues. Number 7, characters come back on the scene, such as Pastor Terry Jones. Number 8, credible but unconfirmed threats. Number 9, New York City / Ground Zero. And number 10, Homeland Security. Now, what happens is that because these types of stories are being reported on in and around September 11th, within the 6 weeks leading up, what we find is that within that 6-week period, you see a steady buildup of these stories, and the closer you get to September 11th, the more and more you start seeing these types of stories inside the news. And so it's not that these types of stories don't occur at other points throughout the year, but it is during the 6-week period that we begin to see a heavy concentration of these particular stories. And because we're leading into the anniversary of September 11th, what these stories do is they trigger the trauma of September 11th, 2001. I talked about this inside of my presentation, the 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Program, that on that day, September 11, 2001, that was the first time in human history when a extremely traumatizing event was globalized in real time. And people all over the world tuned in, not realizing that by tuning in and viewing it and watching the death and destruction and the carnage over and over again, that we were in essence being traumatized and re-traumatized during that time period. And in point of fact, whenever an individual experiences a level of trauma, the emotional reaction that we tend to have is that of fear. And what happens is that if we're unable to resolve the trauma consciously, meaning using our intellectual faculties, then the trauma itself is submerged within the subconscious mind. Okay, and there's a reason why. The primary responsibility or goal of the subconscious mind is to protect the conscious mind from experiencing a level of psychological trauma. So if we're unable to identify what took place on September 11th, exactly what happened, if we're unable to process all of the information that we received on September 11th and all the different stories and all the different reasonings as to why it was taking place, plus on top of that, the death and destruction that put us inside a state of fear, fear compromising our intellectual processes, fear always compromising our ability to ascertain truth from lies, well, we become confused. And most of us on September 11th, 2001, we were not only confused, but we also became very fearful. And as a consequence, the trauma of the event was not processed consciously, and as a result, it was submerged within the subconscious mind. Now, these are basic elements of human psychology, and I outline all this inside the book. And I also have videos on YouTube that people can check out, and one of them is like 5 hours long, where I give more insight into this. But for time's sake, I just want to outline that particular trauma, September 11, 2001, for most people, was submerged within their subconscious mind. It was not processed consciously. And there's 3 main reasons why that is the case. I'll talk about those reasons. One of the reasons happens to be conflicting information. Another one was media saturation that comes in the form of excessive stimulation from media. What is the term that I use in the book? I can't recall it right now. If it comes to mind, I'll repeat it to people. I'll tell people. But the point being is that in that the actual trauma was not processed consciously. What happened was the trauma of September 11, 2001 was submerged in the subconscious mind. Now, what happens is mass media, in terms of the programming that it issues, it functions to trigger traumas in people. Okay, that's the whole idea, because what happens is that if you traumatize someone, they become fearful. Once they become fearful, they begin to externalize power. Once they externalize power, you have them in a state of control, but the control is psychological. It's not physical. It is psychological control. That's why it's a level of psychological warfare. So once you have a person externalize power, now you have them in a state of control. And this is a cycle of mind control that perpetuates itself within mass media 24 hours a day. So mass media, understanding basic elements of human psychology, what it does is that any traumatizing story, and particularly we can use an example of 9/11 or traumatizing event, in and around the anniversary, stories start to come out inside the news in heavy concentration, and there's a buildup up to that anniversary date that triggers the trauma of that particular traumatizing event. So in the case of September 11th, those types of stories come back inside the news. There's another cycle that also takes place. And by the way, before I give you the other cycle, what happens is, as a consequence, is that people begin to think in and around September 11th that another terror attack is going to take place. And one of the reasons why is because the subconscious mind, where the trauma is embedded and submerged, it is not aware of past, present, or future. It perceives everything to be taking place in the present. So when we get in around September 11th of any given year, since September 11, 2001, mass media issues these types of stories about terrorism, potential terror threats, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. The subconscious mind thinks, or at least it believes, that September 11th is happening all over again. Therefore, people are being subconsciously triggered to experience fear again, because the subconscious mind is experiencing the trauma all over again. And again, the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between past, present, and future. It believes that September 11th is happening all over again. What happens is then people become fearful. So every single year around September 11th, people get very fearful who are subject to this mind control program. And then they begin to externalize power. You need someone to come to save the day. And then as a consequence, they're stuck inside a state of control. There's three levels to the 911 fear-based mind control program. Level 1 was the installation of the program, which took place on September 11, 2001. And that's when the actual event took place, and the trauma itself being submerged within the subconscious mind of the global population. The first time in human history where something like that took place. And the reason why was because technology at that point was at a certain point where you can transmit the horrors of the event globally in real time. The first time in human history something like that has been done. So the installation took place on September 11, 2001. And then there's a triggering of the trauma, which mass media engages in the 6 weeks leading up to September 11 to trigger the trauma of September 11. There's also another cycle that triggers the trauma, and that is the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd. That's when we get an infusion of stories about Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, SEAL Team 6. This year it was SEAL Team 7. Terror threats, imminent threats, cyber terrorism, Arab Spring, and plane problems. Sound familiar, people? And if you follow media closely, if you missed it this year, follow it next year, and within those 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd, and the question becomes why? Well, May 2nd supposedly is a day of the assassination of Osama bin Laden. Therefore, the subconscious mind makes a subliminal association between May 2nd and September 11th, because Osama bin Laden, who was supposedly assassinated on May 2nd with no evidence or proof whatsoever, it was a psyops. He is said to be the mastermind of September 11, 2001. So those two time periods, this is what I call mass media cyclical timeline programming. Within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11, and within the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd, you see these types of stories appear in the news in heavy concentration. It's not that they don't occur at other points in the year, but during these time periods, specific time periods, you see a heavy concentration. That's the triggering of the trauma of September 11. And then the last part of the 911 fear-based mind control program is the reinstallation. Okay, so you have the installation, you have the triggering, and then the reinstallation. The reinstallation occurs every single year on September 11, since September 11, 2001, wherein people participate in this morbid death ritual where they dress in all black, and they review the video footage, and they watch it over and over again, the plane striking the building, death, destruction, carnage, what have you, people screaming, ambulances, all this stuff, and it's become a ritual. There's no reason for us to do this. And then in some cases, just to show you how deep the mind control programming is, that most people are oblivious to because it's all embedded within the subconscious mind based upon subconsciously embedded trauma, there are people who will bring their children along to participate, and they go to ground zero. In some cases, they watch it on television, and they have their children, and then in the classrooms, they talk about it. This traumatizing. These children weren't even alive then. It makes absolutely no sense. Before I move on, I conclude with this, as another example, because I also give examples of different traumatizing events that mass media uses to basically re-traumatize people. And about a year and a half ago, there was the 100-year anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. See, that was a traumatizing event that took place 100 years ago, and yet mass media makes a point to present this ritualized event, and people got together and they cried, and they had food, and they had drinks, and they had lit candles, and they sung songs. And this was just think about it. And then they bring their children along to participate. But it's all based upon a ritual, and it's a morbid death ritual where we celebrate death and destruction. But the celebration of the death and destruction of whether it is, let's say, the sinking of the Titanic or September 11, 2001, why do we do that? It's not reasonable. And I will tell you that the reason as to why, one of the main reasons why, is because we have been programmed to, based upon unhealed trauma. See, if you know a person's trauma, you can trigger the person's trauma, and you will know how they will react to the triggering of their trauma. And what mass media does within the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd, within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th, every single year, is to issue stories to trigger the traumas in people, and as the trauma of September 11th, and as a consequence, people begin on a subconscious level, people begin to believe that September 11th is happening all over again. And then as a consequence, they begin to become traumatized again, and therefore they, again, begin to feel fear, and then they begin to externalize power all over again, and then that's how they're maintained in a state of control. This is what I call the 911 fear-based mind control program.
Yes, and I remember Jordan Maxwell once saying that 9/11 basically made him, for a while anyway, give up on humanity. He said to see that buildings could get pulverized into microscopic dust and nobody except a small handful of conspiracy theorists raised questions about the official story on the day it happened was enough to make him basically give up on humanity, because he thought at this point humanity is just too paradigmatic, too fearful, and too flat out stupid to have any chance at defeating the Illuminati, basically. But but that's beside the point right now. The point I'm trying to make is that whole thing about the fact that people, as Jordan Maxwell says, are too paradigmatic, too fearful, and too flat out stupid. As someone who's a counselor, when is it okay to harass, for lack of a better phrase, these sheeple? I mean, they say you shouldn't try to wake someone up who can't be woken up, but some people might say, no. If someone who is not going to wake up, it's not a bad idea to grab them by the neck and say, wake up out of your trance, dumbass. Could you please wake up? You're making it hard for humanity by being in this trance. So as a counselor, when is it okay to harass the hell out of sheeple for being selectively stupid and paradigmatic like this?
Well, I would say that stupid in a sense, especially as it relates to September 11th, we have to be clear in terms of psychologically. We talk about it as a counselor, we have to look at it psychologically, and that's one of the main reasons why when I look at September 11th, I don't think in terms of so much who did it and why. Even though I've researched that, and the official version of the events is absolutely it's asinine and insane. I recognize that, but I'm more interested in understanding the psychological ramifications of the event, and in particular, the traumatizing effect that it has had on the global population. So the reason I'm saying this is because we can call someone stupid, but we also got to look at why it was on that day that people did not ask critical questions. I think that is a more fair and a more enlightening proposition. And let me explain why. You see, on that day, no one knew exactly what took place. Even people who recognized that the official version, even on that day, was not necessarily intellect-based or even reasonable. So in this sense, we have to understand why was it that most of us did not ask critical questions, myself included, although I did recognize that something was not quite right at the time. I recognized that, but I did not understand what was taking place, and I want us all to understand why that was the case. See, in retrospect, we can look back and then we can begin to do the research, and then we maybe even say, look, I was stupid, or we can call other people stupid for not asking the critical question. But the reality is we have to understand why it was that we did not ask the critical questions, and it's not because simply I was asleep. Okay, because there are different levels of dreaming and there are different levels of sleeping. You may wake up from one dream, and you may believe that you are enlightened. But the truth of the matter is that you've just begun a new dream, and that is life. Okay, but let us dissect what took place on that day on a psychological level, and then ascertain why it was that people could not ask the critical questions. There's three main reasons why, and here are those three main reasons. The first is, and to put it in context, understand that on an intellectual level, one must analyze any given media artifact or any given event using their intellectual faculties, meaning their conscious mind. Because the conscious mind, that is where the critical thinking comes in. That is where we ask the critical question as to the nature of the reality or the nature of the information that we are receiving at any given time. It is the conscious mind that asks the question, what is this that is taking place right now, and why is it taking place, and how did it take place, and what is the evidence and proof? Okay, what, where, why, how, when, and then give me the evidence proof. That's the conscious mind. That is the apparatus of our mentality or of our mind that allows us to ascertain whether or not something is true or not, and whether or not we should even ask critical questions in the first place. It is the conscious mind. Now, what happens is that the primary responsibility of the conscious mind is to define undefined elements. In this case, it would be September 11, 2001. Or it is designed to critically about whatever it is, whatever external stimuli or information that it is receiving. So it wants to understand what is that, why is it the way that it is, what took place there, what really happened there, the official version, was it true? You see, we begin to ask critical questions. That's what the conscious mind does. Now, when the conscious mind is unable to define an undefined element or to resolve a problem, and in this case, September 11th was a problem, the undefined element was what took place on September 11th. When it's unable to define an undefined element or to solve a problem, the conscious mind begins to experience a level of psychological trauma. And once it begins to experience a level of psychological trauma, that is when the subconscious mind kicks in to protect the conscious mind. And what the subconscious mind does is it is the great protector. It takes the unresolved issue, in this case September 11th, the undefined element, in this case September 11th, or in this case it could be the problem of September 11th. It takes that and it submerges it within the subconscious mind, and it allows the conscious mind to continue to proceed without having these levels of psychological trauma, experiencing it consciously. And then the subconscious mind will work through that particular trauma. And as it works through the trauma on the subconscious level, if it is not continuously triggered, it will ultimately resolve the trauma. The problem is, of course, that with mass media cyclical timeline programming, we are triggered. The trauma of September 11th is triggered within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th of every single year and within the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd. Now, understand this, that on September 11th, our conscious mind could not process what we were watching and what we were viewing, and in some cases what we were experiencing on that day for three main reasons. Number one, sensory overload. Let me read this from my book on page 61, because I want us to understand it's not enough just to say that we were stupid, because the truth of the matter is that how the event unfolded compromised our intellectual processes. Now, there is another level to this, that there are a lot of people out there that simply do not want to see the truth, and I understand that too. But then there's higher levels of truth, and when we ask the question of what took place and why, and we believe we know the truth, 5 years later, we have an awakening again, and now we've woken up from that dream, and now we get to start a new dream. And then 5 years after that, the same thing takes place. So it's part of the evolutionary process, but to understand what took place psychologically is more important in terms of September 11 than simply calling people sheeple. Let us be clear about this. What is sensory overload? Sensory overload occurs when a person's senses are overly stimulated and ultimately overloaded with external stimuli, i.e. sight, smell, sounds, etc. When a person's senses are overloaded, the conscious mind will be overwhelmed with data and will be unable to process the massive infusion of information received. This is exactly what occurred on September 11, 2001. On September 11, 2001, the vast majority of the global population used its sight and hearing to interpret what was unfolding on their television screens. Buildings smoke, scrambling firefighters, ambulances rushing towards the Twin Towers, a second plane crashing into the second tower, people jumping off a building, the tower not even really collapsing. We all understand that, but in the book, for purposes of diverting from having arguments with people, the tower collapsing in on itself, reports of possible bombs in the building, people running, people screaming, people in shock, blood, burnt flesh, another tower disintegrating, really. Reports of a plane crashing into the Pentagon, report of a plane crashing into a field in Pennsylvania with no evidence or proof whatsoever, reports of terrorism, reports of Osama bin Laden, reports of Al-Qaeda, projections of casualties, reports of staggering death toll, all of this taking place in an 8-hour period. Understand this. This is sensory overload. We were shown the images over and over and over again, and much of it was conflicting information. Is it reasonable to presume that the global population, again, the global population who we may perceive to be sheeple, is it reasonable to presume that the global population was adequately prepared to consciously process the extreme degrees of death and destruction that was unfolding on their television screens on September 11, 2001? Is it reasonable to expect that anyone could consciously process such extreme degrees of death and destruction within an 8-hour period? And in the book, I propose that the global population was ill-equipped to consciously process the high degree of sensory overload that was issued by mass media on September 11, 2001. This sensory overload was issued in the form of audio reports, visual reports, written reports, and through the confusion created by the vast array of conflicting information issued by both the mainstream news and the alternative news. Two other ones, and I'll be brief with these other two. Just to understand psychologically, these are the preeminent reason why people did not ask critical questions about September 11 and follow along with the official story that didn't make any sense. Totally unreasonable and illogical. Does it mean that they were stupid or that they are sheep? Well, not necessarily. It is psychological warfare, you see. Number two, conflicting information. See, conflicting information is the second major contributor to the conscious mind's inability to define an element or to solve a problem. And I've already talked about when the conscious mind cannot process information where it can define an undefined element or solve a problem, it begins to experience a level of psychological trauma, and that is when the subconscious mind kicks in. When the conscious mind receives conflicting information, it is labored with the task of quickly resolving such conflicts. If such conflicts are not quickly resolved, then the conscious mind will experience conscious confusion. Conscious confusion is a form of psychological trauma. Understand this. In this state of conscious confusion, if this state of conscious confusion lingers, then the subconscious mind will activate to protect the conscious mind from experiencing the confusion-based psychological trauma brought forth by undefined elements and unresolved problems. In such a case, a person's subconscious mind becomes the primary resolver of the undefined elements or unresolved problem. Here are some examples real quickly here of some of the conflicting information. Again, when we receive conflicting information, we cannot adequately process information intelligently because when the information is conflicting, it causes a level of psychological confusion within the conscious mind, and as a result, the conscious mind begins to experience psychological trauma. And then, as a consequence, that's when the subconscious mind kicks in. I want to explain something real quickly here. That is that the event of September 11, 2001 was not processed by the global population consciously. Instead, it was interpreted subconsciously. That doesn't mean that people are sheep or that people are stupid. It just means that the trauma of the event was so great that and then the trauma that brought forth the fear compromises our intellectual processes. We can't think critically and think intelligently when we're in a state of fear. So people being in a state of fear on September 11th in and of itself would shut down the intellectual faculties so that we can ask the critical questions in the first place. And this even assumes for those of us who would even ask critical questions, because many of us, we wouldn't have asked critical questions under normal circumstances. Something else to think about. But here are some examples of conflicting information. Reports of explosions in the Twin Towers prior to their collapse. Well, that's information that's conflicting to the official story. Therefore, people will experience psychological trauma as a result. The conscious mind can't define an undefined element because it's conflicting information. Reports of a car bomb exploding outside the State Department. Many of us don't remember that. I remember that. They were reporting of a possible explosion outside the State Department, sources say. They always say sources say. That's psychological warfare, too. That's media manipulation. I call that sorcery. Sources say that there was a car bomb exploding outside the State Department. Was that in the official version? No, but they reported, mass media reported on that. Well, that's also conflicting information that causes a level of psychological trauma, even within the people who believe the official story. Reports of a fifth plane crashing out at or near Camp David. Many of us forgot about that. Reports of missiles hitting the Twin Towers. Well, that's conflicting information, too, based upon the official version. Reports of missiles hitting the Pentagon. Never saw the plane, actually, but we believe, many people believe that there was a plane, even though there's no evidence of a plane, but we believe anyway. We don't ask, but why did we ask a critical question? Most of us didn't ask, not because we were necessarily stupid or we were sheeple. It was because the nature of the event itself was so traumatizing to people that people didn't even process it intellectually or through their conscious mind. As a psychological defense mechanism, they process it on the subconscious mind. That's why later on you got to go back and look at your subconscious mind and start to dissect what was really true, what was really real. That is the awakening. It is internal in the first place. Reports of various makes and models of hijacked planes. Reports of no visible plane debris at the Shanksville, Pennsylvania crash site. How is there no visible plane debris? And there was a plane debris, and it was stated and was reported on that there was a plane that crashed there. That's some serious conflicting information. If a car crashes, we would expect to see some car parts. If a car crashes, we would expect to see some evidence of a car crash. Well, that same logic should be applied to a plane. If a plane crashed in this field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, we should be able to see plane parts. We should be able to see evidence of a plane crash. In the absence of the evidence, well, that's conflicting information. How is the conscious mind going to resolve that particular issue? It cannot. And therefore, it experiences a level of psychological trauma, so it can't process the event itself consciously, intellectually, and ask critical questions. Instead, it is submerged within the subconscious mind. It's subconsciously interpreted. And then, of course, reports that the collapse of Building 7 was a result of fires. You have got to be crazy to believe something like that. Now, does that mean that someone's stupid to believe something like that? No, not necessarily. It just means that maybe they're not in their right mind. And most of us on September 11 were not in our right mind because we were being traumatized by an event that compromised our intellectual faculties, our conscious ability to ask the critical questions. You see what I'm getting at here? The last thing and the most important thing and the most important factor here as to why it was that people did not process the event of September 11, 2001, and many other events, by the way, and process it consciously was because of the intellectually stifling emotion of fear. See, fear itself compromises the intellectual faculties. You cannot think critically. You cannot ask critical questions. You cannot think intelligently if you are in a state of fear, because what fear does, fear shuts down, not only does it in terms of physiologically and the hormonal imbalances that begin to occur inside of the physiologically speaking, inside of the human body. It is the antithesis of what needs to occur for us to be able to intelligently think. That is why when a person, I have a saying that you can't think critically and be in a state of fear because they are mutually exclusive. See, in point of fact, fear taps into the animalistic nature of the human being. Fear taps into the fight or flight mechanism. Again, this is aspects of human psychology that many people don't explore to understand why it is that people react to particular things or why people don't process things in an intelligent way. Well, if they're in a state of fear, how can they process anything intelligently? Because ultimately it becomes an emotional experience now. And as a consequence, the fear causes people to externalize power, which most people did on September 11th. And they may have externalized power to George Bush, come help save me, or they externalized power to this mythical Al-Qaeda, the ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world, G.I. Joe, Cobra Commander propaganda piece. They may believe that to be what they must externalize power to. And as a consequence, they're stuck in a state of control, psychologically speaking. So these three things, these are the three elements that ultimately cause the vast majority of us who either witnessed it firsthand or watched it on the television news or even listened to it over the radio, that cause us to be compromised in terms of our ability to process September 11, 2001, intellectually speaking. And therefore, we have to look at the sensory overload. We must look at the conflicting information, and we must look at fear itself as to why it was that most of us did not necessarily process the event in an intellectual way. Now, again, getting back to your question, it's not an issue of people being stupid. Because I, in point of fact, on September 11, 2001, I didn't know what was going on either. And most people who are listening to this, even though maybe you've researched now and you may have come to a level of understanding now, it is probable that on September 11, 2001, you didn't know what was taking place now. And a lot of people who have propositions, alternative versions of September 11, they have holes in their theoretical conspiracies, just like the official version has many, many holes. Does that mean that everyone who prescribes to the different versions, the various versions of what took place on September 11 that are alternative to the mainstream version of events, does that make them stupid? Does that make them sheep? Well, not necessarily. What I'm getting at is that if you ask me the question, when is it reasonable for us to engage people in such a way to where we begin to look at them in a particular way to where as if we are somehow further progressed along or further progressed in our enlightenment, if you will, to where we perceive there to be sheeple in the first place and that we perceive people to be stupid, I would say that it's never reasonable to do that. Because ultimately, we have to have an intellectual process. When we badger people, when we yell and scream, and we got to fight the New World Order, and we get people riled up and excited, we're tapping into emotionalism. Emotionalism doesn't solve problems, and emotionalism is not intellectual. What solves problems is critical thinking, and critical thinking has to do with conscious awareness and adequate intellectual process. And simply calling people sheeple or calling them stupid, that's not intellectual at all. We got to look at why it is that people interpret things the way that they do, or why it is that people do not interpret things the way that they should. Hope this answers the question.
Yeah, I did a pretty good job. By the way, I do have a caller. I don't know if this caller is just listening or not, but let's just see if they want to talk. I'll let them talk for a few minutes. Area code 216. If you want to talk, you're on the air. Welcome. Area code 216.
I just called in. I just was listening.
All right, that's cool. All right, take care. All right, Lenon. In regards to the way people think, one of my pet peeves, and you're a perfect person to ask this because you're a counselor, one of my pet peeves with any truth movement is, well, like especially 9/11 truth, is they have a fear of their reputation. And let me talk about what I'm talking about here. It was not that long ago when I was in a march against corruption in Philadelphia, and I proposed we shout 9/11 was an inside job as we march. But one stubborn protester started screaming at us and saying, no, let's not talk about this. We shouldn't talk about 9/11 being staged. Well, after the march was over, I confronted that protester, and I told him, listen, Bob, the nanothermite found in the World Trade Center is proof positive that the U.S. government staged 9/11 because nanothermite is a military-grade explosive, and there's only one laboratory on the face of the earth that is known to make nanothermite, and that is the United States military lab. I believe it's in Colorado. I have heard that there is only one lab, and I believe it is Colorado where it is. And I told him that, and he said, well, you know what, it doesn't matter because if we say 9/11 was an inside job, people are going to think we're crazy. And on a similar note, when I had Andrew Bashago on my show a couple weeks ago, he talked about how in 1971 the government used time travel technology to look into the future. And in 1971, they saw 9/11 happen, news articles. That gave them 30 years to prepare for the attacks. But Andrew Bashago said no one in the 9/11 truth movement will talk about this. They've even called me a kook, and they banned me from talks. And I believe Jim Fetzer was once threatened not to give a talk about the planes being holograms because I don't know who threatened him. I don't know the details, but I'm guessing that it was probably someone in the 9/11 truth movement who felt that it would hurt the truth movement's reputation. And I myself recently got banned from a 9/11 truth Facebook group simply because I talked about far out things about 9/11, such as this whole thing about them using time travel technology to give them 30 years to prepare for it. Now, anybody who understands metaphysics knows that the worst prison ever is the fear of what other people think. But the paradox here is that so many people in truth movements, 9/11 in particular, insist that you should care about what other people think because then it will hurt the truth movement. We've obviously got a conflict here. As someone who's a counselor, how would you address this issue?
Well, one of the main problems within the truth movement is the lack of solidarity in the first place, you see. And this lack of solidarity is, I think that it is also reflective of the fact that people have different agendas, even though they may be saying that somehow they're trying to find out the truth about September 11th. Therefore, now their reputation really matters. You see what I'm saying? The reputation only matters if you're part of a collective. Your reputation only matters as an individual if you have a separate agenda than the actual organization or institution itself. And within the so-called 911 truth movement, there is no cohesion. In point of fact, it is a cesspool of confusion. I mean, this is the truth. And no one, please don't take. And I'm not talking about anyone in particular because it's not a personal thing. I'm talking about as I have observed the movements or the progressions or lack thereof of the so-called truth movement, the 9/11 truth movement, I've recognized that the degree of infighting is and the lack of solidarity is indicative of the fact that people have their own agendas. And within these own agendas, they are very careful with what they are willing to talk about or what they're willing to say because their reputation may be on the line. But if you're part of an organization or institution that is a collective, then what you do should be in line with that, and therefore reputation shouldn't be an issue because you will all be in the same accord. But let me explain something else here, and that is that we should all look into all of the alternative versions, whether we say that, and I've gone through all of it. Okay, I've researched through all of it. I've gone through all of it. I've read all of the books that I can find on it. I've watched all of the videos that I could find on it, or any alternative version, going back many, many years ago. Yeah, but at a certain point, I recognized that the deeper issue was not necessarily who I thought did it and why, and the mechanism used to accomplish what took place on September 11th. I was more interested in the subconsciously embedded trauma because ultimately we're still being influenced by that trauma over the last 13 years within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11, 2000, of any given year since September 11, 2001. So I was more interested in understanding the psychological implications of what was the damage that was done on a subconscious level, more so than who I think did it and why. But we should consider the various different versions. And inside my book, I'll just real quickly here, let me just outline this. And I call this the creation of the Great Divide. Because not only is there a divide amongst people who, let's say, abide to the official version, which really, intellectually speaking, there's so many holes in the propositions and so many conflicts and so much in it that is just simply not reasonable. I recognize that the mainstream version or the official version of September 11th is not true. Okay? And then over the years, I've taken a look at many of the other alternative versions over the last, 8 years now. But there is a division amongst people who abide to the official version and then the people who abide to alternative versions. And so this is what I call the creation of the Great Divide, and I believe that it was strategic. And then also within individuals who abide to alternative versions of September 11th, there's also divisions amongst them. They're not necessarily in agreement in terms of what took place. Was it thermite? Was it nanothermite? Was it the bombs in the buildings? Was it a nuclear bomb? Was it holographic projections? Was it UFOs? Was it the reptilian shapeshifters? What was it? Was it the CIA? Was it Mossad? Was it Israeli agents? It goes on and on and on. But within all of these propositions, what takes place is individuals have different agendas and different beliefs, ultimately, because most of, if not all, of what has been proposed in terms of what actually took place, without any shadow of a doubt, what has been proposed by people is not necessarily indicative of the truth. It is merely a proposition that we should all consider. Again, I'm not saying that I believe in one or you believe in the other, but ultimately what I'm getting at is that we must, in the end, demand intellectual process, wherein there is evidence of proof. See, intellectual process, it demands adequate evidence and proof. And in the absence of adequate evidence and proof, we cannot simply accept any given theory. Okay. Now, the creation of the Great Divide. Since September 11, 2001, a divide has been formed between individuals who accepted the official story of September 11, 2001 and those who accepted any of the given alternative stories of September 11, 2001. There is also a growing divide between the demographic of the population that has accepted alternative versions of September 11, 2001. This is precisely what you were just talking about. This is on page 25 of my book. In other words, amongst those who do not accept the official story of September 11, 2001, there has manifested a high degree of hostility, animosity, and hatred. We can also throw in here jealousy and hatred based upon the various alternative stories that happen to conflict with each other. Here are some examples of what I mean. Government conspiracy versus an alien conspiracy. If the U.S. government was responsible for the attacks, i.e. 9/11 was an inside job on September 11, 2001, then it could not be an alien conspiracy unless the U.S. government is secretly controlled by aliens. Watch how convoluted this gets. Again, we are stepping further and further away from the truth because of the conflict, as opposed to working together to determine what actually took place. We're more interested in trying to prove ourselves right, as opposed to proving what actually took place. And if what actually took place is what we believe, that's fine. But let's provide the evidence of proof that conclusively proves that it would stand up in a court of law, intellectually speaking. Number two, controlled demolition versus scalar weapon technology. Well, controlled demolitions would indicate that bombs were exploded inside the buildings. If bombs were exploded inside of the buildings, then scalar weapon technology would not be necessary unless they were used together. Here's another one. thermite versus low-yield nuclear bombs. Thermite reactions would take time and necessitate extensive flashpoints to compromise the structural integrity of the Twin Towers. And again, I've already done all the research. I've read as many books as I can, I could find. I've already watched all the documentaries, and I'm impartial. Whatever a person's belief is, it really doesn't matter to me. I'm impartial. You can believe what you want to believe, but I'm more interested in dealing with the psychological implications of the trauma itself, because no one will find the truth of any of this, September 11, 2001, until they deal with their trauma, because the trauma causes people to react emotionally based upon fear. And fear compromises the intellectual process. How are you going to determine the truth if you're operating based upon fear and your intellectual processes have been compromised in the first place? And most are oblivious to. That's why people get so excited when we bring up September 11. They get so defensive, too, people who believe in the official version. No, you can't talk about that. You can't propose that there were holographic planes. You can't do that. You're crazy. You're a lunatic. You're such and such. Okay, well, you're a sheeple. You're a sheeple. You're asleep. You see how it goes? This is the creation of the Great Divide, and this is strategic. It's deeper than what people think. It is strategic, and mass media plays upon this division, both the mainstream and the alternative news. Now, thermite reactions would take time and necessitate extensive flashpoints to compromise the structural integrity of the Twin Towers. With low-yield nuclear bombs, structural damage would be instantaneous and would require a few flashpoints. You see the conflict there? 3 more, real quick. Holographic planes versus bombs on the planes. If holographic planes were used, then how could there be real bombs on holographic planes? You see the dubious nature of all and how convoluted it begins. And this is just within the alternative media's propagandizations in terms of what people in the truth movement mouthpieces want to propagandize as being what took place. This has nothing to do with the official version. Look how convoluted it gets and how much confusion. And people are going to begin to be at odds with each other and, send each other threats and act like little children. Yes, it's going to happen because they're all trying to defend their beliefs and tear each other down. And then this is supposed to be how we find truth? I don't think so. It doesn't work that way because that's not intellectual. That's emotionalism. The no-plane theory versus remote control planes. How could remote control planes be used when there were no planes? So this is all psychological, too, because the way that I'm writing this is to access people's subconscious minds so that they can ultimately begin to think on it critically about the subconsciously embedded trauma. How could remote control planes be used when there were no planes? See the conflict there. One more, missiles versus bombs in the building. A missile was a projectile that would have been launched from outside of the Twin Towers and projected at the Twin Towers. Bombs in the buildings would have been set inside of the Twin Towers and exploded from within. One from within, the other from without. You see the conflict. The conflicting nature of the above-mentioned examples have contributed to the massive global divide that has been growing since September 11, 2001 and has stimulated conflict between families, friends, co-workers, religious institutions, social organizations, political parties, and, yes, within the truth movement itself. It is important to recognize that this divide was not the result of a natural human process. This divide was strategic and manifested through media manipulation, a manipulation that was presented by the mainstream news and the alternative news. And also outlined in terms of the mainstream news and the alternative news, we want to get into truth movement mouthpiece, how in the end, the ultimate result of any given theoretical conspiracy, or some people want to call them conspiracy theories. I don't like using that term because it's dismissive. I like to say theoretical conspiracies because if you look at it in terms of how things fit, theoretical conspiracy, it is more in line with intellectual process. But the point that I'm getting at here is that even within the alternative news, the end result of any given propagandized theory or theoretical conspiracy was to cause people to ultimately experience a level of fear and ultimately cause people to externalize power. This fear coming from the unresolved trauma of September 11, 2001. See, that's why I thought if it's not intellectual and you're dealing with emotionalism and everyone is fighting against each other, that's all emotionalism, not intellectual. It makes no sense to do that. Then what it does is it taps into the subconscious mind, and it taps into the trauma of the event itself. You can't find truth when you're dealing within the scope of emotionalism and divisions and dealing within the scope of calling people sheeple and yelling and shouting at people in 911's inside job. That's all emotion. It's not intellect-based. Intellect-based causes us to ask critical questions, and not only causes us to ask critical questions, but also to demand the evidence of proof that will support any given claim, such as holographic planes or bombs on planes or no plane theory or remote control planes or missiles or bombs in the buildings. And what you will find is that in the absence of the evidence of proof, I'm talking about adequate evidence of proof that will even stand up in a court of law, intellectually speaking, in the absence of the evidence of proof, people interpreted the information not intellectually, but emotionally. And what it did was it triggered the emotions of fear that was based upon the subconsciously embedded trauma of September 11, 2001. Why is that important? Because most people, including people in the so-called 911 truth movement, always fighting with each other, yelling at each other and demeaning each other, calling each other names and calling people sheeple, which is calling people names. They do not even recognize the depths of the psychological warfare that is being implemented within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11, 2001, and within the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd, that has caused them to react that way in the first place, that has caused them to react emotionally to things and to have their own agendas and to not speak on certain things and ultimately to look at people who they're supposed to be in union with and look at them as if they are the enemy too. And why is that the case? That is the case because there is not an adequate intellectual process. And why is that the case? Why is there no intellectual process? Because it's about emotionalism. And why is it about emotionalism? Because their trauma, dealing with September 11, 2001, has not been adequately healed. And as a consequence, they still feel fear. And as a consequence, they still externalize power. And see, it doesn't matter if you look at the mainstream news or the alternative news. The same end result applies to the global population, including people who believe themselves to be awake, and that is the externalization of power. Ultimately, people still became fearful. Instead of being fearful of Osama bin Laden and George Bush from the mainstream news, Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden from the mainstream news propagandization, the alternative news propagandized different theoretical conspiracies, and people became more fearful about more things than just George Bush or just Al-Qaeda or just Osama bin Laden. Now they're afraid of the Bilderbergs. Now they're afraid of reptilian shapeshifters. It's still fear. Now they're fear of the Illuminati. Now they're fearful of the global bankers, the global elites, because they believe that all these people, depending on which theoretical conspiracy you believe in, all these different people or these different entities, they were the ones who masterminded September 11th. So what's the end result? The externalized power to all of these perceived projections of power and control. Well, the same thing applies to the mainstream news. The same end result applies, whether you follow the mainstream version or the official version or any of the alternative versions. If it causes you to become fearful and emotional and causes you to externalize power, then ultimately you're stuck in a state of control because it's a psychological control wherein fear compromises the intellectual process. So to get back to your question, it is no wonder to me. I'm not surprised on a psychological level. I'm not surprised that people within the truth movement have their own agendas and they argue and fuss and cry. I'm impartial. It doesn't make me any different because I'm not going to be sitting around arguing with grown people. I have 5 children. I'm not going to be arguing with grown people. I don't have time for that. But I'm not surprised by that. And I've seen so many people in the truth movement say such horrible and heinous things towards each other, threatening each other on radio shows, calling each other names, calling each other agents. Anytime, just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean that or just because someone doesn't agree with you spiritually or metaphysically, that doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them on a radio show. That's not intelligence. That's emotionalism. If you come from a place of true intellectual process, what you're really trying to ascertain is the truth. And as you ascertain the truth, you must be willing to submit to the truth that maybe you don't know the whole truth, and therefore you must consider other people's opinion without badgering them or demeaning them or calling them sheeple or calling them stupid. We have to stop doing that because that's all emotional, and it's all based upon the trauma, the subconsciously embedded trauma of September 11, 2001. Until we deal with the trauma, we will not find the truth. Until we deal with the subconsciously embedded trauma of September 11th, you will continue to see people within the truth movement who are afraid to say certain things or who say things out of anger and frustration and who try to spite each other. You're going to continue to see that because the reaction is not intelligent. The reaction is emotional, and the emotional is sourced from the trauma itself of September 11, 2001.
That's right, and I don't really want to get into this subject too much, but just for the sake of all the people who want to find the mysteries about 9/11, it's worth pointing out that Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis has said that at its most complex level, 9/11 was a massive timeline incursion where many malevolent and benevolent timelines were coming together in all-out war. The bad timelines were trying to make 9/11 happen. The good timelines were trying to stop it from happening, and even though it was unavoidable 9/11 would happen, the good timelines managed to make it obvious that 9/11 was staged, well, obvious to those who were awake anyway, and that resulted in 10 years of fear and the birth of a truth movement. That's worth pointing that out because there are some different evidence of different things happening on 9/11, like there's evidence that Flight 93 was shot down. There's also evidence Flight 93 landed in Cleveland. I mean, there's evidence the direct energy weapon that took down the buildings was on a space-based platform in Earth's orbit. Others say it was nuclear bombs in the building, and nanothermite was apparently used to sever the building columns and not destroy the whole building. It couldn't have done that by itself. But the point I'm trying to get is because it was a timeline incursion, there are going to be discrepancies in what actually happened. So the correct answer to the question, what did happen on 9/11, is the only true answer is it depends on the timeline. Now, there is a main organic timeline. I mean, not really clear what exactly happened in the main organic timeline, but for all intents and purposes, what happened on 9/11 does depend on the timeline. But getting off 9/11, there are some other things I want to talk about. We've only got like 48 minutes left, and there are other things here. I want to talk about pedophilia, because it's all running rampant in the Illuminati and also the government. So many pedophiles like George Bush, Ted Heath, just to name a few, that were notorious pedophiles who were world leaders. And interesting thing you have here about Angels in the Outfield. I really liked that movie when I was growing up. I don't remember seeing anything in that movie that would suggest it was a pedophile movie, but apparently you seem to think otherwise. So specifically talking about Angels in the Outfield, touch on that for a moment, but please elaborate for a little bit. What can you say about pedophilia?
Yes. Now, one of the things I did early on, and really that particular movie was really what started me on this path to really start to ask critical questions in terms of media manipulation and mind control. People come into mind control for different. People begin to explore and research mind control for different reasons. But my reason for really dissecting human psychology, symbolism, media manipulation, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind. And in point of fact, Disney itself as an institution, as a preeminent example of mind control, the reason why I really got into it was because during that time, I had two sons. Well, we now have 5 children, but at the time, my oldest son, he may have been 3. My younger son, he may have been 1 year old. Maybe my oldest son was 4. My younger son was 2, something like that. And one of the things that took place for me was I really wanted to make sure that my children received a different life experience in their childhood than I received. Okay, so this is what I'm getting at. We come into this need to find truth and this need to begin to ask critical questions for different reasons, and some people have different reasons. My reason really came down to keeping my children's consciousness safe. In other words, their intellectual processes, to keep the intellectual processes safe from the different degrees of control, mind control, psychological warfare. Understand this, that in point of fact, many people are indoctrinated into certain types of ideas, thoughts, behaviors, even sexual ideas, sexual thoughts and behaviors based upon programming that they receive from mass media. And one of the preeminent programmers, especially of children, happens to be the Disney Institution. Now, my wife and I, we haven't had a television inside our home for about 10 years. And even when we had a television inside our home, we didn't watch broadcast television, okay? And my 3 youngest children, they've never even seen a television inside the home. The older 2, they did. But even then, what we would do is we would either get videos, we would watch videos, and we would go to the library and we would be very specific about what we picked out. And before we would let our children watch anything, we would always screen it first. In other words, we would either watch it before they actually saw it or we would watch it with them. So if anything came up while they were watching it that we felt would be detrimental to their psychology, see, that's how parents should be. I didn't get that type of protection. Okay, I grew up in an abusive home. My father was a drug addict, an alcoholic. He was a crackhead. He used to abuse my mother. There was very little protection. My father should have been the front line of defense. Me understanding that dynamic with my own children, I understood that it's not just about the physical protection, it's also about the psychological protection, keeping your children's mental state safe. And I'll tell you right now, 10 years, my son is 10 years old, my other son is 8. How they think right now, intellectually speaking, is on the level that I was thinking when I was about 22 years old. And they're 10 and 8 respectively. See, this is what I mean. Like, we can really do a service to the future generation simply by taking an intellectual approach and then also going through the process of analyzing and looking at things critically. Things that maybe beforehand I may have seen, I may have thought had been perfectly fine, but now because I begin to really research and begin to engage in intellectual process, use my conscious mind to ask a critical question, what is it that I'm seeing? What's the psychological implications of what's being portrayed in this particular video, this particular song, this particular movie? So I can analyze things like this very easily. Now, but what really set it off was, I remember my wife and I went to the library. Actually, I went to the library, and I happened to see this movie. It was a DVD, and one of my sons, my younger son, he liked to play sports at the time. He still kind of likes to play sports. And And it was a movie about baseball, and it was called Angels in the Outfield. And I remember I saw it when I was a child, but I didn't think anything of it. And I thought, this would be nice. It's Disney. It must be nice, right? Okay, this is an assumption that we have. And it's part of the programming that we receive in regards to particular institutions. It may be Disney, it may be some religious institutions that has particular propaganda that demeans women and causes women to believe they're inferior to men, but we still, because we've been raised in it, we believe it to be true. And then when someone points it out, we may say, you must be crazy. No, the truth is always there. We just have to be open and willing to ask the critical questions and go through the intellectual process, look at the evidence and proof, and then ascertain whether or not it is true. So in this case, I got that video and I brought it home, and while my wife and I we were screening it, we may have watched about 10, maybe 15 minutes, and there was so much in it just within the 10, 15 minutes inside that video that really caused us to begin to ask critical questions, especially about Disney. There were, when we talk about subliminals, okay, and which I had time to really let me give everyone a short version. What subliminal means, it means below. So anytime you see something like like a submarine, marine means like water, the marine layer, or the layer between the water and, anything above the water. There's the marine, okay? Marine means water, okay? So if you have submarine, that means anything below the water. And the water line, the top of the water, that is a line of demarcation. Okay? Subliminal, therefore, same thing. Sub, below, liminal. Liminal is a line of demarcation. It is the line that we can draw between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Anything below that line, in your mind, people who are listening to this, just think of a circle. You see a circle, and then draw a horizontal line through that circle. Okay? You see the horizontal line there? That is called liminal. It is a line of demarcation. Inside of the circle, anything above that line, that liminal, is your conscious awareness. It is interpreted by your conscious mind, which is aware of past, present, and future. It is also interpreted or processed by your conscious mind, and your conscious mind asks the critical questions. Okay, that who, what, where, why, when, where's the evidence of proof. It also tries to define undefined elements and to solve problems. Okay? And then anything below that line, then with the subconscious mind, is not aware of time. Everything is happening in the present. Okay? We're talking temporal mechanics here. Okay? So you talked about the timeline before. Your subconscious mind is oblivious to timelines because it doesn't perceive time to be anything except what is taking place in the present moment, okay? And this is what we call temporal mechanics, okay? I understand these concepts too. Okay, so anything below that line is subconscious, okay, because that's that threshold, subliminal. Anything below that is subconscious. Anything above that is conscious. Now, subliminal messages ultimately are designed to not deal within the scope of your conscious awareness because it's subliminal. It's below that line, and that line is the normal auditory and visual perception of your conscious awareness. So anything that you do not interpret consciously, like September 11, 2001, is submerged within the subconscious mind. That's why subliminal messages are always directed at the subconscious mind. In other words, it is a message. It is a message that is to be sent or interpreted by your subconscious mind. When what we found inside that particular movie was that there were so many references to pedophilia and sex just within the first 15 minutes that were subliminal, that it caused my wife and I to become very uncomfortable. When we turned it off, and I said, I'm taking this back. We're not going to allow our children to see this. And then the library was already closed by that time, so I didn't want it inside my house. I went and I took it and I put it inside the car. And the following day, I took it down to the library and dropped it off in the drop box. Now, that one experience, I remember after that, I told my wife, I said, and see, by this time, I'd already begun to study subliminal messages, aspects of human psychology. I was getting into alternative information. Michael Tsarion, David Icke, what's this gentleman? Jordan Maxwell. I remember I bought all of Jordan Maxwell's videos. When I say all of them, I bought all of them, and I watched all of them. I'm talking about the DVDs, and I also watched all of the things, everything I can find on the internet. I can find a Jordan. So I've been through all of it. Read all the David Icke's books except the last two. Watched all the DVDs. I even got into Alex Jones for just a very brief period, maybe about over the course of about 4 months, and I watched as many of his documentaries as I could. I used to listen to his radio show. So I've been through all the information, but by this time, I had begun to ask critical questions about the programming that children were receiving, and in particular, the programming that really was instructing on a subliminal level or dealing with the subconscious mind, programming for children as it relates to pedophilia. So I remember I told my wife, I said, one day I want to go ahead and do some analysis of the symbolism and of the subliminal message. She said, you should do it. Okay? Now, I didn't actually do that documentary. I did other documentaries before that. One was called What Lies in Plain Sight. It was a documentary that analyzed Michael Jackson's Beat It, which is really a subliminal programming for male group homosexual masturbation. That's why beat it is really, that means masturbate. That's why when they say beat it, and I'm talking about in terms of the interpretation that you will find in the actual video footage. I would propose that the lyrical content itself didn't propose that because it was just lyrics. But if you look at the lyrics and match it up to the actual video footage that you find inside the song and the video Beat It, you will find that it's really about these groups of males not beating in or running away from gang violence. They're actually all converging on a central location, and they're all coming to a central location to beat it. And if you look carefully, when they say beat it, beat it, beat it, beat it, the dance and the dancers themselves, what they begin to do is they take their hand and they put it close to their crotch, and they begin to stroke as if they are masturbating. You guys go back and look at the video footage. It's all there in plain sight. That's why the video itself is titled What Lies in Plain Sight. That's the type of program. I used to watch that and sing the song and do the dances, right, the choreography, when I was a child. And whenever it was beat it, when they say beat it, and I start doing the same little motion that they do inside the thing, not realizing that basically this is propagandizing male group homosexual masturbation, and I'm a child. Well, that's pedophilia, because what it's doing is it's programming the child to begin to perceive itself as being a sexual being when it's just a child. And then in the case of Angels in the Outfield, what it does is it causes adults who view it to begin to perceive children as being sex objects too, because of the compromised positions that these two little orphans are put in throughout the actual, I was going to say cartoon, throughout the whole movie itself. The point that I'm getting at here is that once I recognized that there was a need for the analysis to begin to take place and began to really delve deep into that, I produced other documentaries. The other one that I did after the workings of Eve, or the one I did after What Lies in Plain Sight was the workings of evil, and that was an analysis of Rihanna's Umbrella, wherein I found this reference to this Rain Man entity, and I actually show there's a still frame that actually shows the head of or the bone structure of this Rain Man entity. All of it's subliminal, because the reason why most people didn't see it is because it's just one frame. It's a single frame that flashes before your eyes while you're watching the video, and the video itself has all different levels of subliminal references to occult aspects of quote-unquote dark spirituality, if you will. Okay, this is going somewhere. Anyway, after I get into all of this, and I do a couple of other documentaries, that's when I decide to do Angels in the Outfield, the analysis, but I call it Demons in the Outfield. And what I do is I go step by step, and I outline all of the various positions that the young boys put in terms of the storyline, right, that really is compromising him and his safety, and then also all of the references to sex that are shown within the actual film as subliminal messages. And it is not until you begin to analyze things, consciously as it relates to the subliminal implications of what's really taking place that you begin to see it for what it really is. And once I began to do that, I remember at a certain point I decided to go and look at the early works of Walt Disney, because I wanted to understand whether or not this type of pedophilic content was there from the beginning. And you know what I found? That the pedophilic content was there from the beginning. I went back and I looked at the black and white, the first films of Walt Disney that was called the Alice series. And you will find references to pedophilia in this little girl named Alice. She's put into these compromised positions where she's amongst all these different males and all these different references, and really be, and she's dressed, how she's dressed is as if she is an adult. No adult supervision, which is something you find in Disney films throughout the duration over the last 25, 30, 40 years now. Why are children not being adequately protected? Why are these children out there doing things without having parental supervision? This is all programming. And then on top of that, why is it that the little girl in this Alice series, why is it that she has on a dress as if she's an adult, and she has on lipstick as if she's an adult, she has on a mascara as if she's an adult, and she's positioning herself and kind of flirting, physically speaking, with these older males? Well, this is what I call the pedophilic projection of the child as an adult. And you will find that in Disney films, to a great degree, this is a central theme, to present children as if they are sexual beings. And what it does is it legitimizes within the mind of the pedophile it's a continued abuse of children, and then we want to believe that somehow Disney is an institution that is about family values and is a bastion of family values. I don't think so. I know that it is not the case. And in a point of fact, you look at all of the stars, the Disney stars that have come up over the years, and look how their lives have turned out. Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Miley Cyrus, it goes on and on and on. That is not by accident. And as parents, getting to the point, as parents, it is our responsibility to protect our children from this level of psychological warfare. That's our responsibility. But we don't think of it that way, most of us. Most of us, we're oblivious to the programming, and many of us, when people outline the programming intellectually and give you evidence and proof, and it's not emotionalism. I may speak about it with a degree of fervor, but that's just so that people can, find a little entertainment value in what I'm saying here. That's all. I'm not emotional about it. It's intellectual process, and I go through the intellectual process, and I give evidence and proof to back up any given claim, and anyone who is in their right mind and who is willing to think critically about any given thing, and not everyone is, and that's okay too, they will be able to see the truth there. And then they will take the next step. And what is the next step? They will begin to put in defense measures now for their own children, so that their own children they're not exposed to the Disney princess programming and propaganda. They're not exposed to the different levels of pedophilic programming that is clearly and evidently expressed within the Disney institution. And most of what you find in Disney, cartoons, not only cartoons, but the movies themselves, you will see references to pedophilic content. You also see references to so-called demonic programming, too. You think I want my children participating in that? I don't think so, and it's not going to happen. That was the reason why I decided to really start to get into this work, not because I want to find the truth per se, but because I wanted to understand what I needed to do to keep my children's consciousness safe from these different degrees of programming. And if people really looked at Disney for what it really was. A lot of people don't want to because they were raised on it themselves. Just like a lot of people who buy to particular sexist programs, they don't look at their sexist program because they were raised in sexist program, their father before them, their father before them, and they don't want to question it because now they got to question the nature of the reality that they've been experiencing, that their father experienced, and all the way down the line. Well, if you really want to have a different experience, if you want your children to have a different experience, you're going to have to begin to look at things differently, including Disney, and go ahead and go through the process as a parent to say, I'm not just going to allow my children to watch anything they want to watch on television, if you have television, or on the internet, if you allow them to watch the internet. I'm not just going to have them watch anything that is produced by Disney just because it's Disney. No. Instead, what am I going to do? I'm going to do my due diligence as a parent and as a responsible parent, and I'm going to screen what I allow them to see, or I'm going to watch it with them, and then if anything does come up, I can either explain to them what's going on so they can intellectualize it, or I can tell them, this is inappropriate for you at this age, and when you get to an age where you can process this intellectually, then you can watch it. And that's precisely what we do with our children here.
Sounds reasonable. Disney is a major Illuminati operation in many ways. Definitely want to try to stay away from it. And anyone who want proof that subliminal advertising works, just look at how the Coca-Cola company flashed Coca-Cola messages back in the day when movies had intermission right before the intermission, and virtually everybody who saw that flashing Coca-Cola symbol subconsciously noticed it and went to get Coca-Cola during intermission. Coincidence? I think not. But moving on to some other stuff here, I want to look at some of your you know what? Let's talk about male and female energy for a moment, because I saw on your website in regards to counseling, you want to try to draw a balance between male and female energies, which makes perfect sense. If you're too dominant on one side, you're going to have problems, just like people say you want to enhance the right brain in this reality. Well, if you get too right brain, you're going to have problems, because we do live in a matrix. You have to acknowledge that, and you have to have a balance between the left and the right brain and the male and female energy, or else the matrix will treat you poorly. So in regards to the male and female energy, what do you want the human race to know in regards to balancing male and female energy? Tell us.
Yes, and that is to understand that we are complementary, and that we are complementary halves of a whole. And my wife and I, we call this the wholeness principle. Now, this wholeness can be found in the individual if they are in a state of balance, but it can also be found within male-female relationships, okay, if both parties, if they have a level of balance within themselves, that you can find a level of balance between the two. And the reason why this is important is because in terms of male-female relationships, one of the main reasons why people tend to have difficulties in male-female relationships, establishing positive male-female relationships in particular, is because most of us are programmed as men to perceive women to be outside of ourselves, and then to perceive women to be in competition with us. There are opposite sex. Opposition implies war. It applies conflict. Even in the terminology that we use, it's quite evident in terms of the programming that we're receiving. Same thing with women. There are women who they perceive men to be, they're at war with men. I call this the male versus female war imprint program. They perceive men to be in opposition to them. They see men as being these destructive forces. They see men as being someone who's trying to dominate them. Well, that is not the case, because men, in point of fact, real men, we don't function that way. Okay. I also outlined how men function within the context of a male-female relationship. It's very specific. It's very specific. If you are going to engage in a positive male-female relationship, you're going to have to begin to perceive yourself as being part of the other person. It's holistic. My wife and I, we call this the wholeness principle. So this wholeness is not just in terms of the individual. It is also expressed within the actual relationship that they have with their complementary sex, not opposite sex, okay? So one thing that my wife and I, what we have done is we do live video streams. We continue to do it now even to this day, titled Positive Relationships. And the positivity it stems from a level of balance. And one of the great challenges that we face as a species on the planet is a lack of balance in terms of how men relate to women and how women relate to men. In point of fact, how men relate to themselves and how women relate to themselves, there are levels of imbalance. The imbalance, in point of fact, on an individual level, deals with a lack of healing as it relates to subconsciously embedded traumas that has compromises the individual's ability to perceive themselves as being worthy of a positive relationship. That's when we get into the issue of self-esteem. You see, the level of imbalance that we find in an individual who happens to be female is directly related to the subconsciously embedded traumas, in many cases, of their childhood, or in some cases based upon the relationships or dysfunctional relationships that they have had with men, intimate relationships, and therefore there's a level of imbalance. They begin to see all men as being their potential victimizers. With that level of imbalance, as it relates to male-female relationships, will ultimately manifest in dysfunctional male-female relationships, and that is why, as the woman or as a man, we must engage in the healing process of the subconsciously embedded traumas, especially those traumas that influence how we perceive male-female relationships and how we perceive our own self-worth, self-value, and self-esteem. So my wife and I, we have really taken the time to help people in male-female relationships, and also we do a live video stream on YouTube every single Monday, and we not only do we answer questions, but oftentimes we have topics that we talk about that will empower people to begin the process of preparing for a positive male-female relationship, and then also to help parents to begin to look at, or future parents to begin to look at, their power as parents to positively impact the quality of their relationship and the quality of the experience of their children. So there's a lot of different topics that we delve into, but one of the primary foci, if you will, that we delve into nowadays happens to be this issue of male energy, female energy, masculine energy, female energy, and how they interact and what the relationship that they have to each other, and ultimately how it materializes in the form of a positive male-female relationship, and by extension within the context of creation, in other words, creation of children, and then ultimately within a healthy, thriving family institution, which is something that my wife and I, we've been able to materialize here.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and balance them out, or the matrix is going to come back to bite you. There's no question about that. One thing I want to talk about, it says here, the Borg Agenda, your master work. I'm looking at some of the subjects here, seeing which one in that movie is worth talking about. How about technological dependency? Yeah, we're becoming so dependent on technology, not realizing that the NSA is basically putting stuff in our technology to spy on us and suppress our consciousness. But I think actually, let's talk about that specific thing for a moment. The NSA being a consciousness-suppressing mechanism. It's very interesting how, of all the whistleblowers that get hassled, they all get hassled, but it seems like NSA whistleblowers are the ones that get hassled the most, because the Illuminati relies on the surveillance system so much that it might as well be called the keystone to the arch that holds it all together, because if they lose the surveillance system, they lose everything. They can't blackmail people. They can't look into the future to predict trends and everything. They don't have stuff to incriminate people. And, I mean, the human race, to such a extent, is so stupid. I know, I shouldn't use the word stupid. We talked about that. But people should realize it's obviously not about safety. It's about suppressing your consciousness and keeping you in a state of fear, helplessness, and control. So as a counselor, how do you look at the NSA surveillance system, and how should people cope with it and wake up to what it's actually about?
Well, what I think about is that if we were not so dependent on certain levels of technology, because many levels of technology are perfectly fine. Okay, it's not like everything is being monitored or everything is being used against us in terms of technology, because that would be an overstatement in point of fact. But if we weren't so dependent on technology, then a lot of what we perceive to be the control network would simply not have any influence or any value whatsoever. So what I would say is that if an individual really looked at their life and looked at what they were doing day by day and their interaction with particular types of technology, then they can simply, get to a point in their life where they recognize, what is it that I really should be doing? Okay, and let me be clear, because I don't want people to think that somehow you have to abandon technology and somehow you got to go back to the Stone Age. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of things that we do that we don't have to do in terms of our interactions with technology. And so therefore, if we're going to complain about the potential of, let's say, the NSA spying on someone, but they're spying using, and again, hypothetically, they're spying using technologies that we are actually engaged in unnecessarily, then why should we complain? Okay, let me give another example of what I mean by that. Because what I want people to understand is that you really got the onus is on you. The responsibility is on you. If you know that someone is going to use something against you and you don't have to use what they're going to use against you, well, then why not just not use what they're supposedly going to use against you? Okay, but let me just say this, and that is that, you know, over the years, like there's been so many different theoretical conspiracies that have really been propagandized, especially in the alternative media, that really me in particular, put me in a state of fear, okay? I mean, you really got to break the fear paradigm. You begin to realize that it's not about what you think other people are doing to you. It's really about what you are doing to yourself. That's where the true power comes from. That's where the true power lies, when you really realize that ultimately it is about what is going on in your life and what are you doing to contribute to your life, whether that is in a positive way and in a negative way. And sometimes what we do contributes to our own demise or contributes to our own destruction, things that we do that we don't necessarily even have to do. So as an example, I remember, especially early on, it was so much about, you know, the control network. It wants to keep track of you all the time. There's going to be surveillance. There's going to be a control network grid, a surveillance grid, and it was just on and on and on. And really what it made people feel as if it was hopeless. There's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can do because no matter where you go, there's going to be a camera on every single corner, even though that's not the truth. You know, no matter what you're going to do, no matter what you do, they're going to spy on you and your email address. They're going to be viewing your email, and there's nothing that's not necessarily true either. Okay, because ultimately you can just choose not to use email. Okay, and you really can, because people for thousands of years, many hundreds of thousands of years, did not have emails, and they got along just fine. Okay, the point that I'm getting at is that so much of the propaganda makes people think as if something bad is really going to happen somewhere down the line, not realizing that what is being propagandized is already happening. And here's an example. What's the point in microchipping the global population to track them when you can just sell cell phones en masse to people for really reasonable prices, have people all over the world and you know that cell phones are easily tracked. So there's no reason to take the extra steps because you can already track a person based upon their cell phone. And yet we're being propagandized with all this, what I call fear-based mind control program, to expect some kind of like global conspiracy and people are going to be put in concentration camps or FEMA death camps. This is the type of stuff that goes on, and people just begin to think about without any critical thought. There's no need for that. They're going to be put in these FEMA death camps, and they're going to be microchipped somehow, and that's what's going to be used to track them. Well, people are already tracked. Every time you send an email, it's recorded. And where you send it from, the IP address of your computer, it's recorded. The fact that I'm talking to you all here on Skype right now is being recorded. So people, why do we complain about some future doomsday-like scenario when we're already engaged in particular activities that ultimately is basically being tracked and being on some level compiled, and yet we want to complain about something that potentially is going to take place later on, and then we want to absolve ourselves of the responsibility of being responsible for ourselves, and then recognize that there are certain levels of addiction and certain levels of dependency that we should simply overcome in terms of our dependency on technology and our addictions to technology. They would ultimately eliminate the potentiality of these threats that we perceive to be taking place or that will take place somewhere down the line. I hope this makes sense because I want people to understand that we can complain about all these external forces that we think is somehow controlling us or that we think are spying on us, but we got to look at what are we doing to contribute to that if it is in point true. If that is true, what are we doing to contribute to that? And if we are doing something that is contributing to that we don't necessarily have to be doing, well, we need to change our behavior pattern. And that's what I would say to that, because it's so easy to begin to think that somehow there's all these forces out there, and if it's not the Illuminati, it's the global bankers. If it's not the global bankers, it's the reptilian shapeshifters. If it's not the reptilian shapeshifters, then it's the Dracons of their cousins. If it's not the Dracons, it's the global galactic federation of light, and on and on and on. It's the Freemasons. It goes on and on and on. But then we absolve ourselves of personal responsibility and looking at what we are doing in our lives. It's not so much about what we think others are doing to us; it's about what we are doing to ourselves.
Well said. And in regards to what they are doing to us, there is a little bit of a debate there, and I think I should get into this. Many people will say that the goal of the Illuminati is to decrease the world population by at least 80%, and I'm being very generous when I say 80%, and then microchip the rest of us to control us and take away our free will. However, other people, including among others, Akashic Records Theater Andrew Bartzis, he's my favorite source because you really can't go wrong with his Akashic skills, he has made it clear, and so have others like George Kavassilis, that not all the factions within the powers that be in the Illuminati want depopulation. Andrew Bartzis has even asserted that the ultimate goal of the Illuminati is not depopulation. It is actually to change the free will of all of humanity so they can make humans feel that their free will should be used for malevolent purposes and also warrior-like purposes. And keep in mind, the Draco-Reptilians and the malevolent aliens who control the Illuminati are a warrior race. And Bartzis has said that the ultimate goal is to convert humanity into a cosmic war machine galactic empire, analogous to the Star Wars galactic empire. And there's no doubt the microchip global population plays into this, because once they microchip everyone, then it's a lot easier to turn all of humanity into a cosmic war machine. And now a couple of things about this. The fact that there's a debate between the depopulation and the non-depopulation people who believe opposite sides, because it's all factionalized there. But get into that. What do you think is the real truth behind those factions who want to either depopulate or not depopulate the Earth? And how do you think humanity should cope with both sides to that coin?
Well, what we should do on an individual level is look at what is relevant to us. I have a saying that there is reality, there is your personal reality, there is, there's reality, there is your personal reality, there is, what is it? Okay, I think it's, there's evidence and proof, and then there's relevancy. Okay, so let's look at each one of these. There is a reality, which is something that we all ascribe to collectively as a species, but then there's also your personal reality, which doesn't necessarily have to equate to the collective reality. And then there is evidence and proof, the evidence and proof that backs up your personal reality, but then there is also relevancy. In other words, is what you perceive to be true even really relevant to you in the first place? Okay, this is in terms of the intellectual process, and this is something that I actually teach people. And actually, that's actually the fifth one, the one that I. But anyway, there's another one too. I just can't recall it right now. But I want people to understand this, and that is to say that I'm more inclined to look at what is relevant to me based upon evidence and proof, not what I may perceive to be relevant to me because someone said that it was relevant to me. See, the problem is that oftentimes, anytime someone brings up the potential for death, everyone thinks it is really relevant to them. But that is really because fear is being triggered in them. It is a physiological response, it is an emotional reaction to external stimuli. So whenever you bring up, the potential of, let's say, a doomsday-like scenario, or something that's going to impact the global population in a profound way, in many cases in a bad way, any kind of doomsday-like prophecy, global population reduction, the BP oil spill that go from Mexico as being the greatest ecological disaster of our time, and it means that people are going to die. Anytime you bring up that, people start to get scared, and as a result, they take interest, not asking the critical question, is it really part of their personal reality? Is there evidence and proof to back up their claim in the first place? And is it really relevant to their life? Now, I want us to think critically about this, ladies and gentlemen, because ultimately you have to have an intellectual process. If we are to believe, again, without evidence and proof, we're dealing with in belief, okay? So, in other words, I do not have evidence and proof, conclusive evidence and proof, just because someone wrote it inside of a book. That's not evidence and proof. Just because someone said it on a radio show, that's not evidence and proof. That's hearsay. That's conjecture. I'm talking about conclusive evidence and proof that will determine something to be true. If I don't have evidence and proof that there is this global agenda for population reduction, I should not simply believe it simply because someone said it or someone wrote it inside a book or someone said it on a radio show. I don't care who the person is. In point of fact, anyone who is listening to what I'm saying, anything I've said here, it doesn't mean that it's true. You have to validate it with evidence and proof. Now, what I do in my work is I give evidence and proof. I'm not going to tell you that there's reptilian shapeshifters because of hearsay or conjecture, or because someone else told me that there are reptilians. I can't do that because that's not intellectual. See, intellectual process demands adequate evidence and proof, or adequate intellectual process demands conclusive evidence and proof, okay? Adequate intellectual process demands evidence and proof. I can't tell you that there are pink elephants that have one leg that can fly that like to eat chocolate fruit cake, and because I said on this radio show and I say that they're ruling the world, you believe it because it's not part of your personal reality, and there's no evidence. I can't manifest conclusive evidence and proof. Now, you can believe me, but if you believe me, you're not dealing in the scope of intellectual process because intellectual process always demands conclusive evidence and proof. Okay? So what I'm getting at here is that I can't propose something without providing evidence and proof. That's why in my work I always provide evidence and proof, and it's up to the viewer or the reader, in some cases with my books, to ascertain using the intellectual faculties whether or not the evidence and proof backs up my claim or my proposition or my theory, or if they do not. And what I want people to understand is that the notion of global population reduction is not backed up with conclusive evidence or proof. Now, this doesn't mean that it may not be possible because it doesn't mean that reptilian shapeshifters don't exist or that pink elephants that have one leg that can fly that like a chocolate poop cake does not exist. Because in point of fact, I'm a relative realist. And from my vantage point, all things exist, even if it just exists in your imagination. And it will influence your behavior. It will influence your thoughts. Even if it's just in your imagination, it is real enough there to influence you. But this gets to a deeper issue, and that is what is the reality that you want to experience based upon evidence or proof or based upon hearsay and conjecture. Understand this, ladies and gentlemen, that if on planet Earth, it is really a closed loop in this sense. That if you take one species off of the planet through population reduction, it's going to influence everything else that exists here on the planet. See, if you eliminated all of the ants on the planet, the ecosystems around the world will crumble, and ultimately life, to a great degree at least, would cease to exist as we know it exists today. The levels of balance that is here would cease to exist as we know it today. And other species will die off because the ants are not doing they're playing their role or playing their part within the ecological global system here. Well, just imagine, ladies and gentlemen, I know a lot of people wouldn't want to believe it to be true, but this is the truth, that if you eliminated, let's say, 4 billion people off of the planet, 5 billion people, the implications of doing something like that in terms of the levels of balance or even the levels of imbalance on some levels that exist here that maintains nature as is within this closed loop here on this planet that we call Earth would cause catastrophic damage to not only the other human beings that exist here, but then all the other life that exists here, not just on the physical, what I mean by on the Earth physically, but also within the water, so forth and so on. If you take out, 50%, 80%, 90% of any given species, it's going to have profound ramifications to everything else that exists here on the planet Earth, including the so-called elitists, or the Illuminati, or the reptilian shapeshifters, or the Dracons, whatever you want to call it. It's going to influence their life too. And probably, again, this is all hypothetical to believe that this exists anyway, but as just to go along with the logic stream, it would influence them in a negative way too. I want people to understand that there's no reason, if we want to believe that there's a great force out there that's controlling us, and the control is so precise as it exists today, then there is no need to depopulate. Because ultimately things are working just fine as they are in terms of the power structure. So there's no need to mess with something that's not already broken. But let's take this one step further here too. It is not that there are forces out there that want to depopulate the human species, because ultimately the human species is doing that on its own. So we always want to absolve ourselves of the responsibility. How is this the case? Because the duplication of us and the creation of progeny, in other words, creation of life and reaching in the future generation, it comes out of the central matrix of male-female relationships. So therefore, if you want to depopulate the planet, you want to eliminate the reproductive abilities of the human being, all you got to do is destabilize male-female relationships. Now, and this is logical here. You just destabilize male-female relationships, and then we'll just do it to ourselves. I call it the male-female one program. We don't get together properly. We don't establish positive male-female relationships. Men always are looking at women and in particular sexualizing women, or don't think of them as anything worth more than their sexuality. Well, that is population control. Why? Because ultimately, even if a child is created, the child's life experience within the matrix of that male-female dysfunctional relationship and dysfunctional family institution is going to be such that the child will suffer like I suffered. I can't blame that on the Illuminati. That was my parents' fault. And your children can't blame it on the Illuminati. My children can't blame it. That's on me. So what I'm getting at is that instead of focusing in on without any evidence of proof, because I have yet to see conclusive evidence of proof of global population reduction as an agenda by, let's say, the Dracons or the Illuminati or the reptilian shapeshifters, the cousins of the Dracons, or the Galactic Federation of Light, or, the Freemasons or the global bankers, whatever externalized projection of power and domination. I have not seen any conclusive evidence proof that proves it, and I also have a saying that time always tells the truth. So I want to just express this to people. As you engage in these types of theoretical conspiracies, you always got to keep in mind that time always tells the truth, and you cannot hold on to any given theory without any evidence of proof indefinitely. And so let us say that there is this massive conspiracy to depopulate the human species. But again, people don't recognize the ramifications that would have not only on the rest of the human species that exists, but also the individuals who are supposedly in power, but then also in terms of the ecological system that we have, all the various life forms that exist here on planet Earth, and how we are so intricately incorporated within each other's existence. It would have profound implications. The world as we know it today would not exist as we know it today, and the world as it exists, the level of balance that exists as it exists today would not exist if you eliminated 80-90% of the global population here on planet Earth of human beings, or of any species for that matter. But I want to say, okay, let's say that there is this massive conspiracy out there. Let's say that there are these people who somehow want to destroy 80% or 90% of the global population. Okay, let's say that that is the case, but you don't have evidence to prove. So what do you do as an intellectual process? Well, what do? You say, I am going to set a deadline. Okay, this is practical, not emotionalism. I'm going to set a deadline for this. See, oftentimes doomsday-like scenarios are proposed without any deadline. So then, therefore, people can hold on to them indefinitely. People still think that Jesus Christ is coming back because no deadline was ever set. And it's absolutely asinine, in my opinion. People still waiting on Jesus Christ to come back. And 1,000 years ago, there will be people who are still waiting for Jesus Christ to come back because there was no deadline, no time set. And see, that's mind control, because ultimately intellectualism demands, evidence of proof, but also the evidence of proof must be delivered within a reasonable amount of time. It hasn't been delivered in terms of Jesus Christ coming back for the last 2,000 years, supposedly, if you want to believe that Jesus Christ existed as is expressed within the Bible in the first place. That's your business. That's your religion. Again, you can believe what you want to believe. But that same logic stream should be applied to any given element, media artifact that you receive or any given proposition, including global population reduction. So what do? Intellectually speaking, you say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and consider this as being a possibility, but I'm also going to set a deadline. And why is it that there was not a deadline quite set in the first place? Why is it that all these theoretical conspiracies, there's no deadline on these doomsday-like scenarios? Well, the reason why is because there's no evidence of proof that proves that it's going to take place. And one of the primary materializations of evidence of proof would actually have to be a timeline that is conclusive, that you can say, okay, by this date, 80%, 90% of the human population will be gone. Okay, so what do? You set your own timeline. You say that if this does not happen within the next 5 months, if this does not happen within the next 5 years, if this does not happen within the next 50 years of my life, then I must abandon this notion of global population reduction. And do you know that there are people that are unwilling to do that? Because if they do that and they set the date and the date passed, now they're going to have to look at the degrees of programming that they accepted as being true without any evidence of proof, and then they're going to look at themselves and ask the question, I've taken the last 5 months, I've taken the last 5 years, I've taken the last 50 years, focusing on something that I believe to have relevance to me, that I believe was part of my personal reality without any evidence of proof, and it influenced me in negative ways because of all toxicity and negativity. It caused me to become fearful, externalize power, and ultimately come into a level of psychological control, and now I got to face the truth that I believed a lie. So set a date as a form of intellectual process, and if by that date what you believe that does not materialize, then you got to look at your intellectual process and critically ask the critical question about the nature of the reality that you wish to experience, not about the nature of the reality that someone else is trying to propagandize to you to tell you that somehow there's reptilian shape without any evidence of proof. Hearsay, conjecture, or to the global population without any evidence of proof, conclusive evidence of proof. Hearsay, conjecture. Now, if you want to believe, if you want to operate within the scope of belief, that's fine. But understand that belief is not truth, and if the belief puts you in a state of fear and causes you to externalize power, it is nothing more than a slow trip to the depths of personal dissatisfaction. It is a slow trip towards disempowerment. It is a slow trip into paranoia and depression, dysfunctional relationships with other people. Where under normal circumstances, if you did not abide to that degree of programming, your life would have been much more blessed.
Okay, thanks. By the way, I can give you 4 minutes on one more subject, but I need to quickly touch on this, elaborate on what I want to discuss lastly here. The debate over the pineal gland and the extent to which the Illuminati want our pineal glands open. Andrew Bartzis has also said that one of the biggest misconceptions among the truth movements is that the powers that be want to suppress the power of our third eye chakra. They want to suppress our pineal gland. He claims they actually want our pineal glands open because if our pineal glands are open, it's a lot easier for them to brainwash us through things like subliminal programming. And he's even said that the whole idea that fluoride is used to calcify the pineal gland is a complete and total misconception. There are actually other purposes for fluoride, which I don't really have time to get into. But this opens up a whole new can of worms because probably the majority of people think that they want our pineal glands suppressed so that we can attain higher consciousness, but no, they want to keep it open to brainwash us more easily. So says Andrew Bartzis and maybe a couple of other people who are in the minority that believe that. So, Len, you have exactly 4 minutes. Please talk about what you have to say about this contradiction here.
Yes. Well, it's interesting we have these contradictions, but these contradictions are not based upon conclusive evidence of proof. Whether one believes that the pineal glands are being, were being programmed or led to experience the calcification of the pineal gland to close them off, or the decalcification of them to open them up. And then whatever theoretical conspiracy comes out of that, whether it is that some external force wants us to open them up so that we subject to different degrees of mind control in a more efficient way. Again, the question becomes: is that hearsay, and is there evidence of proof that backs that up? See, ultimately, you got to demand evidence of proof. Now, it may be true, but you simply can't accept accept something as true being true without evidence and proof, because evidence and proof is what determines whether or not something is true, and you got to use the intellectual process to ascertain that truth. I want to say something else because I have a video up on YouTube. Now, very, very brief here. It is so fascinating to me that so many of us, we perceive spirituality to be something that is outside of ourselves. We also perceive spirituality to be like some kind of like something that's special and so powerful that all we got to do is become more spiritual. I'm going to tell you y'all that I'm not interested in becoming more spiritual. I'm more interested in becoming more physical. And you can interpret that however you want to, but I want us to be clear about this, because ultimately, no degree of mind control is going to take place if one is using their mental capacity, their intellectual process, adequate intellectual process, and critical thinking to protect their subconscious mind. I want people to understand this is the last thing I'll say here, and I have a whole series on this for premium members on my website, The Truth About Subliminal Messages, How to Protect Your Subconscious Mind. The subconscious mind, its primary objective is to protect the conscious mind. So all different groups of mind control programming that people are concerned about, myself included, when I was concerned about my children, that can only take effect if the subconscious mind is subject to it. But just as a subconscious mind can protect the conscious mind from experiencing levels of psychological trauma, we can make a conscious choice to use our conscious mind. Okay, so now we're getting into spirituality, because your conscious mind, your ability to think, is the closest thing to spirituality. In point of fact, your mind is a bio-spiritual interface. That is what allows you to have a communicational line and link to your spiritual self. Okay? I know we don't have time to get into that. Real quickly, understand that just as the subconscious mind has the ability to protect the conscious mind from different degrees of programming or different degrees of trauma, well, guess what? The conscious mind can do the same for the subconscious mind. That is to say that if you are consciously aware of self, and if you develop your intellectual faculties, and you develop the ability to have adequate discernment as to what is true, what is false, what is lies, what is fiction, what is fact, what is relevant to you, and what is irrelevant to you, no degree of programming, no degree of mind control will have any influence, no degree of subliminal message would have any influence on your subconscious mind. Why? Because you're using your intellectual processes to protect your subconscious mind. So that's what I would say. People, you got to deal with your intellect. You got to deal with your mind. If you deal with your mind, nothing can touch you, including what you may perceive to be these external forces who are trying to calcify or decalcify. It's totally irrelevant. And where's the evidence to prove any of this in the first place? Again, the intellectual process would cause you to ask that critical question. But even if we want to assume that it is true, that the calcification or the decalcification of the pineal gland is being done so that these forces that be can access the subconscious mind and somehow program us even deeper. Well, then just simply do this as something that is constructive. Begin to develop your mental faculties, conscious ability to ask critical questions and ascertain truth from lies. And as you do that, you will naturally and normally protect your subconscious mind from any degree of programming, any degree of mind control.
Thanks, Lenon. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I'll tell you the same thing I tell all my guests. I love having some of my guests on more than once. I'd like to, but the problem is I made a goal of trying to get as many different people on this show as possible. So even though you're a very knowledgeable and fascinating individual in many ways, chances are I won't be calling you again simply because I want to try to get as many different people on this show before giving anyone double dips, because that's probably the best way to do it. But it was a pleasure having you on. I wish you luck in your future career doing research and everything else you do.
Yeah, much love to you, Brother Andrew. Last thing, understand that the pursuit of truth and justice will always be hampered when subconscious trauma is a source of the pursuit. When intellectual process is a source of the pursuit, then truth and justice will be adequately and efficiently realized. Peace and blessings, brother.
Peace out. Bye. Well, folks, that concludes this show. Next week, I don't know who I'm going to have next week. I'm trying to get Michael Tellinger on to talk about the Anunnaki and ancient astronaut stuff, but I don't know if I'll have him on yet. Saturday, after this upcoming Saturday, I might have Dr. Joe Wallach on to talk about nutrition, but I haven't gotten back on that yet, trying to do 2 shows in 1 week for a change. But with that being said, if Michael Tellinger or Joe Wallach can't come on, you might just listen to me for a week or maybe a replacement guest. So namaste, everybody. Peace out.